Oh, hello, we're in Deuteronomy. We are now in chapter 31, which again we'll do in at least 2 parts, possibly 3. Anyway, we'll just read verses 1 to 8 for this video. Reading from the NIV. Then Moses went out and spoke these words to all Israel. I am now 120 years old, and I am no longer able to lead you. The Lord has said to me, you shall not cross the Jordan. The Lord your God himself will cross over ahead of you. He will destroy these nations before you, and you will take possession of their land. Joshua also will cross ahead of you, as the Lord said, and the Lord will do to them what he did to Sihon and Og, the kings of the Amorites, whom he destroyed along with their land. The Lord will deliver them to you, and you must do to them all that I have commanded you. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them. For the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Then Moses summoned Joshua and said to him in the presence of all Israel, be strong and courageous, for you must go with this people into the land that the Lord swore to their ancestors to give them. You must divide it among them as their inheritance. The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. So, Moses has finished all the reading of the law and is preparing them to actually go into the land. And Moses is no longer able to lead them. There are 2 reasons for this. One, his age. He's now 120. And perhaps more significantly, because God had told him, you will not cross. That's because of the incident in Numbers. I can't remember the chapter offhand at the moment. But it's when he beat the rock and commanded that water came from the rock. And God had told him, just speak to the rock, you don't need to hit it. And he was judged because he did not acknowledge the Lord as holy before the people. Earlier on, there's mention of this earlier on, maybe like chapter 3, one of the first 3 chapters of Deuteronomy. At that point, I noted that Moses seems a wee bit resentful of that. There's no hint of that here. But it's the Lord who says, the Lord himself will cross over ahead of you. It's a key thing to understand in the Christian life. God goes ahead of us. And here, this is why it's so important. We must respect leaders. We should have asked to have good leaders. But we must not put our trust, our faith in them as such. Because it is God who goes ahead of us. And in a way we can think of death being like that. Because Jesus has gone ahead of us. He has conquered death. He's died. And he's risen again. Never to die again. He has gone ahead of us. And then we got to in verse 4, it talks about how that Moses reminds them that God defeated the kings of Sihon and Og. That God in our lives often does seemingly small things as a preparation for something bigger. And we need to learn the lesson of the small things. As it says in Zechariah, do not despise the day of small things. We should learn from the day of small things. It says the Lord will deliver them. And do not be afraid. Now, their trust needed to be in the Lord. For most of them it wasn't, if we're honest, and as most of the rest of the Old Testament proves beyond doubt. And then Moses, having spoken to the people, effectively says the same thing to Joshua. He says, be strong and courageous, which is just said to the whole people. And says, you must divide the land. And says, the Lord himself will be with you. Do not be discouraged, because he will never leave you nor forsake you. And these words, you find these words repeated at the beginning of the book of Joshua, verses 7 and 9. And so here, Moses speaks to Joshua. In Joshua chapter 1, Moses is dead, and God himself speaks the words to Joshua. Sometimes we can hear something in a sermon or a prophecy or whatever it might be. And then there can come a time when God speaks to us directly, or really makes the word land home in our lives. And also we see in the Great Commission, Jesus said, I will be with you until the end of the age. God's promise is to be with us. It is not a matter of God saying, right, this is what you need to do, off you go and get on with it. He does say go and get on with it, but he also says, I'll be with you, I'll be doing it as well. God involves us in what he is doing, and he goes on ahead of us. So on that note, we'll leave it there, and let's take these things